Hi there. Thanks for joining us, Zachary. How are you today?
I'm good, Sandra. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. I'm excited to get started to share with everyone exactly what a real estate lawyer does in a transaction, because in Canada, you are required to use a lawyer to close a property, whether you're selling or buying. Isn't that right?
Absolutely.
Would you recommend that someone use a lawyer that doesn't specialize in real estate? Or are there things that come up that, a specialist like yourself would be aware of that aren't necessarily common experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I would always recommend, going with a real estate lawyer, somebody who does this as their primary business and are aware of the little differences, right? I mean, the same way why we will choose a doctor who specializes in something when we have something of significance, and selling a property is a large asset. So you do want to make sure that the person you're dealing with is competent in that area.
Excellent. So let's talk about what has been in the news a lot lately, and that is title fraud and how title insurance can impact that. But I want to talk a little bit about how the title fraud, in a nutshell, how it's happening.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm aware of those incidents in the media. I've read about them like most of us. I know those particular situations did involve highly sophisticated false identification,
Yeah.
but essentially it's still a risk to anybody with property. I know in terms of things that we can do to try and prevent these situations from happening. I mean, one of the things is generic advice of being careful where we're putting out our information, right? Especially in the days of the internet, our information is being requested everywhere. So even being careful about storing pictures of our IDs or passports, or
Yeah.
where we're entering certain information, these are all things that lead to somebody's ability to steal your identity. And that was the case in those situations. It was sophisticated parties who went in and stole people's identity and sold properties from under them.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's like I say, think of Jason Bourne. Like, this is, big business. They're going to have a lot of money and a lot of skilled people that are doing these sort of nefarious things to create incredible quality of ID, right?
yeah, and I know one thing. Properties with mortgages. If I understand the stats correctly, those are, or sorry, properties without mortgages are targeted more often, and that's
Yeah,
because there's one less layer of security.
right.
Right. So in these situations, you had to get through a real estate agent who's doing some sort of verification on ID, and a real estate lawyer who's also doing ID verification.
Mhm.
Now, when there's a bank involved, you're also going through that process. So I know they do try and target properties without mortgages in order to eliminate one of those three layers.
Right.
So beyond being careful what you share online, and beyond, an overhaul in the processes of what we're required to do as lawyers and what real estate agents are required to do and the lenders, the best way to protect yourself is title insurance. And title insurance is the policy specifically there that protects against title fraud, among other things, and specifically compensates for losses resulting from fraud or the legal fees required to defend and restore title. And title being your ownership or your right to that specific property.
Mhm. So in those situations that were most recently in the news, hopefully there was title insurance that the current owner, the, quasi seller, had title insurance, and then the buyer would have had title insurance. So is it safe to say that it would have gone to court, the seller probably would have gotten their home back, and then the buyers would have been compensated financially?
Yeah, the theory of law is there, and it does protect both parties, both innocent parties in that scenario. And those the title insurance policies would be there to ensure that they don't incur any financial losses.
Yeah.
But regardless, they will endure time and stress going
Oh,
through this.
terrible.
It's also a timely process. To restore that title could take, over a year. So it's something that no one really wants to go through. And in terms of preventativeness, title insurance doesn't quite do that, but it will ensure that you're made whole financially.
So if it's going to take as long as a year, who gets to have possession of that property? Would it be the original owner, the seller, or is the buyer able to stay there?
Well, it would actually, it would depend, first of all, if someone's occupying. So if the innocent buyers are occupying that property, then while they figure out that they're still technically the owners of they hold the actual title. That's my understanding, to be
So
clear.
the seller has to find a place to live for a
Yeah,
year.
now I believe in both the most popular instances. One was an investment property that was vacant, correct?
Okay.
Condo. I'm not sure if the other property was vacant.
I'm not sure
Um,
either. Yeah, I'm not sure of the
Usually,
details.
yeah, because
Wow.
or else that moving day would be a little awkward when somebody comes in with a truck and there's a family living there.
Imagine, can't even
Yeah.
imagine. Um, on that note, I know that, the perception of the general public was that, oh, the real estate agent didn't do a good job, or they were in on it. And I'm saying, well, not only does the realtor have to check ID, but the lawyer also has to
Sure.
check ID. And so it was really good quality ID, right? And they probably, I mean, this is big business. So they probably, if you even Googled them, they probably have all kinds of stuff online showing their face with that name. Right. So
Yeah,
I
and I
mean, it's
mean,
really hard for someone, unless you know them personally. If somebody calls a realtor and says, come and list our house, we're Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and we do our checks and balances and do our due diligence. And it's yes, it's Mr. and Mrs. Smith that own the house. And we go over and they have great ID with Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Why would we think that there's something strange about this, right?
right. And I mean, I'm sure you guys have you have your list as a realtor and we do as a lawyer of, red flags. But if those don't pop up, I mean, you're trained professionally
Yeah,
to sell real estate. I'm
exactly.
trained professionally in law, but neither of that gives or makes us an expert on, determining the
Right.
authenticity of an ID.
Yeah. Yeah.
So beyond it feeling different from maybe our own personal IDs and doing what we're required to do by our governing bodies, that exists. And with, I think part of this is not that there's much we can do about it at this point, but things have gone virtual now, with COVID being an accelerator to that movement. So now, sometimes or we can close a deal without physically meeting a client, right? We
Mm,
have ways to verify the IDs through video conference, but
right.
that's another layer that plays into this, maybe the increase in title fraud. Title fraud has always been there, but
Mhm.
it's now, a little more prominent, especially recently in the media.
So when can you get title insurance? Do you have to buy it like on the day that you close the property?
So in like in most transactions that happen nowadays, it's going to be a requirement of the lender to have a
Right.
title insurance policy. So most deals we see go through on the purchasing end are going to include title insurance. And now that title insurance, it's a one-time premium. So it's paid only on that day of closing. And that covers you for your entire ownership of your property. So until you sell it, that is active. So it's not a monthly fee. It's not like a regular insurance policy where you're paying every month. Now, if you are a homeowner and you've owned your property for a long time, and when you purchased it, you didn't have title insurance, you're still able to go and actually purchase what's called a homeowner's policy. So instead of it being a purchase and lender policy, it's for existing homeowners and it's to protect against the exact same things. But again, it works and you can go ahead and purchase this at any time. So you can do that directly through a lawyer, or you can contact a title insurance company directly and go from there. So an example, like a premium on an average $750,000 condo with a mortgage on it, that'd be approximately $500.
Yeah,
So
it's very affordable. It is
yeah,
like the best insurance you can buy.
absolutely.
Yeah. But with a house, it also helps with things if there is something on title, for example, an encroachment
Mhm.
or your fence is on your neighbor's property. So you've got to move it now because he's putting a pool in or whatever the situation is. It
Yep.
covers things like that, right?
Yeah, that's where I would advise speaking with a lawyer because sometimes there may be exceptions in the policy for existing things.
I
So
see.
if you're aware that it may be an issue,
Uh,
some insurance policies may specifically exclude it. So
right.
that's where better to go to a lawyer to get an opinion on that title insurance policy before just purchasing directly.
Okay. Okay. So at what point should a buyer or a seller retain a real estate lawyer?
Yeah, well, I mean, the traditional standard is to kind of hire essentially when your deal is firm. And I think part of that was because there was, for a long time, there was a lack of accessibility to the lawyer. Most people, find it hard to get a lawyer on the phone or have to go through layers of assistance. And there's also that fear of our hourly billing, that if I get my lawyer on the phone, he's going to charge me for this phone call.
Yeah.
Now, how I run my practice, I encourage people to reach out to me when you start either the buying process or the selling process. So that includes well before you actually get to a firm agreement on either side. Now, I charge flat billing like most people or most real estate lawyers, which means there's no additional charge, if we're having a conversation about something. But I prefer this because, especially when we're setting up a purchase, to at least speak with the clients and understand their situation, I can better advise things that they can look out for, or even have a conversation with the agent to, recommend certain clauses that we should ensure are included in there, or to make sure that, on the selling end that we investigate title and make sure there's nothing that's going to
Right.
stop the sale, and making sure we're good to go. And, a lot of times it's a quick conversation, having that, 1 hour up front can protect you from, a lot of issues in the future.
Exactly. Good to know. Do you review status certificates for a client who has retained you?
Yep.
Even if, if there's multiple offers or whatever, and they want to get rid of that status condition, you'll review it?
Yeah. And part of that, engaging with a lawyer beforehand is kind of setting up like that arrangement. And I've done that for clients where, there's competitive offer days. So they
Right.
know they're going to have to be ready. So, as long as we're scheduling ahead of time, I can ensure that we can have that, status certificate turned around in a couple hours rather than a day or two, to
Exactly.
ensure that they can then put their strongest offer forward.
It also, if by doing it in advance, also gives you time as a buyer to contact the management office if there's any questions that you may have, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's good to know. And then, choosing a real estate lawyer, what sort of advice do you have for the public in choosing a good real estate lawyer? What should they look for or avoid?
Yeah, I mean, I have a simple piece of advice for this, and it's know your lawyer's name. And that sounds a little silly, but too many times I have conversations with people, and they don't actually know the name of the lawyer who's representing. And that's
Yeah.
because they hire maybe just based on a firm name or somebody recommended a law firm, or now we have closing services, right? And they're still run by lawyers, but type in real estate closing into Google. You'll find a ton of paid ads from firm names or services that they usually promote primarily on price. So they're in this price war about who can make it lower on paper. Now you'll see a little asterisk, and there'll be a ton of extra charges with that. But try finding the name of the lawyer who's actually going to be closing your deal or giving you advice if you need it. Right? It'll be very difficult on a lot of those websites to find the actual lawyer. So when choosing a real estate lawyer, simply know their name, know the person who's actually there to protect your rights. It's like choosing a good real estate agent, right? We have a ton of options. And a lot of times you can always find somebody cheaper, but knowing who you hire to protect your interests will be more valuable than that slight difference in price. And what they say, an easy deal is easy for most people. But it's when there's a problem, you really see how good your representation is. And that's what you're paying for at the end of the day.
Yeah, I don't recommend going for the bottom of the barrel. And when it comes to price, you get what you pay for. I've seen, easy looking deals go sideways because there's something difficult to deal with, and it comes as a surprise to everybody. So you want to have good legal representation on your side. Absolutely. And also from a realtor's perspective, when my client gives me a firm and I don't know who the lawyer is, and I want to run something by the lawyer, like, we have this thing, do you like this clause better or that clause? How can I protect my client the best? I don't want to just go through the general phone line. And I also don't want to be asking the legal assistant, because that person is going to give me, in general, this is what we will do. But if I'm asking questions, a very pointed question to protect the client, and at the end of the day, their lawyer is going to have to deal with it. So I want to go directly to you and say, how should we deal with this? Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, having the name of the lawyer does sound relatively basic, but it is so important. And it doesn't even come to us all the time as the representative for the seller or for the buyer. So thanks for
Yeah.
making that point. So is there anything else that you want to say to the general public about real estate law?
I think we covered most of that.
Okay,
You know,
good.
I really, like I said, I'm really big on that last point about knowing their name. But I think it's also important to have a conversation up front about communication. You know, I run my practice a little differently, being that, you know, I used to be a real estate broker. So I was used to that on-call
Ah,
nature, you know, having clients reach out at different points of the day. And while I keep more, you know, standard hours nowadays, I give out my, you know, direct line to my clients. I encourage them to call me with questions, and same thing with the realtors I work with, to
yeah,
have
no, that's
them, you
great.
know, like you said, I have a question about a clause. What can I do here? And
That's
I'd rather,
invaluable. First of all, you have experience as a realtor, fabulous, because you understand what we're going through, but also the fact that you are reachable during the time when real estate often happens, which is nighttime and weekends. Thank you. That is brilliant, because that's when we have the questions, right? And it's
yeah,
better to ask you, as I say, it's better to ask you before it becomes a mess, right? My job is to protect
definitely.
my client. Your job is to protect the same client.
Exactly. We're, you know, we're working together on the same client. So, and the better our relationship is too, and the better we can work together, the more the
Exactly.
client benefits.
I like that. I like that a lot. Thank you so much. And thank you for providing a download for the viewers. So click on the button below and we will send you the download. Thanks so much, Zach. I appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me, Sandra. It was a pleasure.